As I was really digging into the research this week, I started noticing these absolutely fascinating, but kind of hidden, forces that are completely reshaping our wallets and the global market. Today, we're unpacking a dynamic that affects all of us. We're talking about everything from how much you pay for groceries to understanding where our tax dollars actually end up. So it's a paradox we're seeing everywhere right now, isn't it? The top-line numbers tell us the economy is supposedly growing, and yet everyday consumers are feeling totally squeezed and businesses are stressed out of their minds. Across the research, economists point to a pretty clear reason for this. The state is effectively eating the economy through two massive parallel engines.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with 1, when the state consumes, then 2, the despotic Leviathan, 3, weaponized military Keynesianism, 4, when defense eats consumers, 5, the crowding out effect, and finally 6, navigating the new economy.
All right, let's jump straight into section 1, when the state consumes. To really understand how a government affords to consume so much of its own economy, the sources point us all the way back to 1973. That's when Stanford economists Ronald McKinnon and Edward Shaw diagnosed something they called financial repression. Basically, these are policies that essentially force banks and citizens to finance government debt at rates that sit below inflation. It acts as this invisible, hidden tax on your savings. And the research shows this isn't exactly a new playbook. Its evolution tracks incredibly clearly over the last century. We go from the post-World War II Bretton Woods capital controls straight through the 1970s Regulation Q ceilings that limited deposit interest. Fast forward to today, and post-2008 liquidity coverage ratios forced banks to hold vastly more government debt. The mechanisms might evolve, sure, but the end result? The state continues to capture capital. Moving right along to section 2, the despotic Leviathan. Looking at how this financial lever operates today, I stumbled across this fascinating recent discussion paper from the IZET Institute of Labor Economics. It dives deep into how IMF conditionalities actively reinforce a very specific state structure that these researchers call the despotic Leviathan. Building on the work of economists Acemoglu and Robinson, this concept describes a state operating essentially without any real constraints. We're talking about a setup where government power vastly exceeds society's power. It prioritizes wealth extraction for a super narrow elite rather than, broad economic development for everyone else. And the kicker is that modern financial architecture actually enables this. Let's put some hard numbers to this and look at Egypt. Between 2022 and 2025, IMF-mandated policies pushed their central bank's interest rate to an all-time high of 27.75%. Now, the stated goal was taming inflation, but the actual real-world result, it made borrowing impossibly expensive for everyday, productive businesses, totally stalling real economic growth. And the resulting wealth transfer in the data is just staggering. By the 2025 fiscal year, Egypt's projected interest payments on its domestic debt, which is money paid directly out to wealthy bondholders, is actually projected to exceed the country's entire tax revenue. Wrap your head around that. More than 100% of all taxes collected goes straight to paying government debt interest. For some perspective, that is over 14 times the nation's entire food subsidy budget. Researchers highlight how this engineers a crazy dynamic where R is greater than G, meaning the return on capital drastically outpaces real economic growth. In just 5 years, income flowing to domestic fixed income channels grew by a factor of over 4, while the real economy grew by less than 3. So passive investor wealth explodes while the productive economy just suffocates. Which brings us to section 3, weaponized military Keynesianism. Okay, so we've seen the financial engine. Now we need to look at the physical side of state consumption. Unlike traditional Keynesian stimulus, the kind meant for building bridges and civilian infrastructure, military Keynesianism allocates those massive government funds directly into the arms industry and defense budgets to artificially boost economic growth. Critics in the source material, like former U.S. Representative Barney Frank, refer to this practice as weaponized Keynesianism. He points out the complete contradiction in an economic philosophy that looks at funding civilian bridges as wasteful, but views funding combat planes, even those that are quite literally never used in action, as our ultimate economic salvation. And guys, this isn't just some abstract theory. In 2024, global military spending hit an absolutely staggering $2.7 trillion. That's a 9.4% jump in just a single year. From the US to India, the data clearly shows this isn't a temporary spike. We are looking at a massive, new, permanent baseline. Now for section 4, when defense eats consumers. So what actually happens when $2.7 trillion floods into defense? Well, it directly impacts the consumer markets. Imagine you're a massive manufacturer. Are you going to take a consumer goods contract with volatile margins and super price-sensitive shoppers? Or are you going to take a defense contract with guaranteed volumes, guaranteed profits, and a massive government backer? Naturally, suppliers prioritize defense, which pushes consumer companies right to the back of the line. And on top of that, the competition for raw resources has gone completely global. Take China's 2025 dual-use items catalog, for example. It restricts exporting materials that serve both military and civilian purposes. This means that specialty chemicals meant for everyday cosmetics or semiconductors needed for your next smartphone are getting caught in massive bureaucratic delays. Consumer goods literally become collateral damage. Moving to Section 5, the crowding out effect. When we combine that initial debt engine with this massive military engine, the squeezing effect is profound. Research from Karlstad University on 9 European nations shows that military spending creates a severe crowding out effect. Sure, it provides a stimulus, but it's heavily dampened compared to regular capital formation. In highly indebted nations, pouring all this money into defense actively crowds out the actual investments that grow the real economy. And the state's footprint extends way beyond weapons. U.S. federal agencies spent $30 billion on food purchases between 2018 and 2022. The military essentially operates a parallel retail universe. When governments buy agricultural commodities at this monumental scale, they basically dictate global prices. A military wheat contract affects bread prices globally, leaving us, the consumers, to foot the bill at the local grocery store. Finally, Section 6, navigating the new economy. Given this rather intense landscape, how on earth can the private sector adapt? Well, a report from Stanton Chase outlines a few key survival strategies. First, businesses have to build regional self-sufficiency to survive export bans. Second, since you really can't outpay defense contract stability, you have to attract top talent through dynamic brand purpose. And finally, smart companies are actively partnering with defense to license dual-use innovations that actually have civilian applications. As we wrap up this explainer, the sources leave us with a really vital question to ponder. In a world where the state aggressively consumes resources through skyrocketing debt and a $2.7 trillion weaponized stimulus, what room is honestly left for true inclusive prosperity? Can consumer markets even thrive? Or will these dual engines of distortion leave us permanently squeezed? It is definitely something to keep a close eye on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.